Everybody, so I'm so delighted to be with you today. We're a minute over already, but really it's an incredible opportunity to give moderation to this talk. My name is Alex Belser. I'm a volunteer at Chacruna. I work on issues of sexual identity and gender diversity, and also get to work with a variety of a number of psychedelic medicines, mostly psilocybin and MDMA. But today I am really and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce this talk and our speaker. So I'm not sure if we have the speaker live from Mexico DF, from Mexico City. I hear there's a rainstorm there, so we're going to do our very best to make sure that we have a good connection. But I will begin to sort of introduce this talk, which is entitled The History of Medicine and Ritual Uses of Psychedelics in the Aztec worldview. And I see that we're joined by our speaker, given by Osiris Sinuhé González Romero, who is a PhD candidate at Leiden University in the Faculty of Archaeology, Heritage of Indigenous Peoples. His dissertation, which is entitled Tlaloc, The Wisdom of the Nahuatl People, Intercultural Philosophy and Right to Land, will be published by Leiden University Press. Congratulations, I look forward to that title coming out. Osiris was awarded the Coimbra Group Scholarship for young professors and researchers from Latin American universities. He has been involved in psychedelic research for the last 13 years and is a founder of the Via Synapsis, an academic society focused on the organization of the University Congress of Psychoactive Substances. It's hosted by the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. He has been working in the book New Essays on History and Philosophy of Psychedelics. González Romero has taught undergraduate courses in the Faculty of Philosophy, UNAM, and his research interests include the philosophy of psychedelics, history of medicine, indigenous knowledge, decolonial theory, political philosophy, heritage studies, and aesthetics. He currently collaborates as a researcher at Centro de Investigaciones Históricas y Culturales de Hidalgo, it's the Ministry of Culture. And Osiris, if you're able to join, let's give a warm welcome to Osiris, who's going to be presenting today on the history of medicine and ritual uses of psychedelics in the Aztec world. Please join me in welcome. And I think we have a technical moment. The rains of the FA are potentially making things complicated. Just give us one more second, hold tight, because I think we're going to be able to get to speak. If not, I actually have a backup recording of his talk. There I see he's joined us. Isn't this? It's really something, isn't it, when we try to meet from across lands? It's not just a matter of cultural difference and language difference, but we have technical problems as well. What I may do if we have some difficulty is try to play a pre-recorded version of this, and if Osiris can join us with a stable connection, we'll bring him in whenever it works. So I'm not sure if he's able to see me, but I think he keeps on coming in and out. Okay, I'm going to try to show this video, and we'll give it a pause when Osiris is able to join us. So I'm going to share my screen, actually, because I have this backup option. Hold on a second.
Hello, everybody. My name is Osiris Sinuhé González Romero. I'm a PhD candidate at Leiden University, Department of Heritage of Indigenous Peoples. I am very glad to participate in this conference, Sacred Plants of the Americas 2, and I'm very grateful with Pia Lapachi for the invitation, and also with the support of the Chacruna team, mainly Karen, Ibra, and Alex. I will share with you a talk called History of Medicine and Ritual Uses of Psychedelic Plants in Aztec World View. The aim of this talk is to show briefly the primary sources which allow us to host the study of the different uses of psychedelic plants in an Aztec world view. The main sources available to us for their study are as follows: archaeological evidence, ancient codices, manuscripts, and chronicles written by Spanish friars and physicians. And also, in order to carry out research on psychedelics in ancient Mesoamerica, it's necessary to take into account a wide array of methodologies that come.
Okay, I see Osiris, hi, can you hear us?
Hey, hello everybody, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, excellent, I'm so glad.
Okay. Thank you very much for your patience and for waiting a little bit because some technical issue. No toca Osiris Sinuhé González Romero, ni momachtia se doctorado ompa Leiden altepetl hueji tlamachtiloyan, no yolo pachpaki, pampa inintonali nitlatoske y panteoshiwime in yuki Peyotl, ololiuhqui, teonanacatl y pan mexicatlatl. Mi nombre es Osiris Sinuhé González Romero. Actualmente estudio doctorado en la Facultad de Arqueología en el Departamento de Patrimonio Legado Cultural de los Pueblos Originarios, y estoy muy contento de poder compartir con ustedes una presentación sobre las plantas sagradas, especialmente sobre los usos rituales del ololiuhqui, del peyote y de los hongos sagrados. Voy a permitir compartir con ustedes una presentación. Vamos a comenzar. Bueno, esto ya lo vimos, lo mencionamos. The aim of this talk is to show briefly the primary sources which allow us to host the study of the different uses of psychedelic plants in Aztec worldview. The main sources available to us for their study are as follows: archaeological evidence, ancient codices, manuscripts and chronicles written by Spanish friars and physicians. Of course, in order to carry out a research focus on the ritual uses of psychedelics in ancient Mesoamerica, it's necessary to develop a transdisciplinary approach, the implementation of a wide array of methodologies, such which take into account the archaeological evidence, but also historiography, iconography, philology, and also it's important to contrast with ethnographic studies with contemporary indigenous people in Mexico. This talk is located in the field of the history of medicine because its objectives are to critically reflect on very specific categories, such as physician, Tepactiani, medicine, Tepactli, disease, Cocolistli, as well as the different uses associated with these plants, ritual uses, therapeutic uses, ludic or recreational uses. For example, one important thing is to recognize in psychedelic research the different type of uses of psychedelic, for example, sacred or ritual uses, therapeutic uses, recreational or hedonistic uses, but also, for example, it's very important to know the philosophical uses. This is one hypothesis that I have been developed by many years. And for example, I am very glad to hear in the panel previous focus on the preservation of peyote by Virarica organization that Santos talked also about philosophical uses. It is very important because, for example, the concept or the notion or the idea of hikuri is not only related with a plant, but also with territory and also with a worldview. By the reason, for example, one of the goals of this presentation is to reflect about the Aztec worldview, reflect about psychedelics in a whole, in a sacred landscape. Let's move forward. For example, before to talk about the Aztec uses, it's important to talk about the ancient roots in Mesoamerica. Of course, we have to be careful with the archaeological records or with the archaeological evidence, because, for example, it's very difficult to interpret these images, this iconography, without the support of the historical sources. Here we have the Teotihuacan mural paintings from Tepantitla, painted during the classic period. And here we can appreciate a sacred plant at the center of the image. Some researchers have been identified this with ololiuhqui or morning glory. And it's possible to appreciate a deity at the center of the image and two priests in each of the sides of these images. And of course, this image is related with the deities of fertility, the water, the rain, and it's related with a legendary place called Tlaloc, which is a place of joy, of happiness, and of course of fertility. This is one example. Also, we have the mushroom stones of the Maya. These stones come from Caminaljú, Guatemala, and are very useful, for example, to reach an accurate framework, especially, for example, related with the entheogens. And it's really, really important to highlight that in Native American ontologies, for example, it's very common to understand that a living being is on the plant. The plants are deity, there are not objects, and it's necessary, for example, to recognize this ontological turn in order to reach a better understanding about these cultural features. Here in these mushroom stones, we can appreciate some human beings or some animals related with the sacred mushrooms. I will move forward because our goal is to reach the Aztec worldview. Of course, here, the Maya archaeological evidence, we have some records related with visionary experience with the lintel of Yaxchilán, Chiapas, which is hosted or in the British Museum. And also we have a very well-known image that comes from Palenque, Chiapas, the smoker, and we can appreciate an elder, a wise man smoking probably tobacco or a mixture of different sacred herbs. Also, the Codex Vindobonensis, it's from the Mixtec people. This codex was made in the post-classic, and here we can appreciate a ritual with sacred mushrooms. Some researchers have been highlighted that it probably the characters on the pictures probably will be gods, but it's more probably that they will be priests. We can recognize, for example, the year, for example, the year one flint, and the names of these characters. And also, for example, of course it's an hypothesis. We have to be carefully with this. There are recognized as sacred mushrooms. Of course, it's not my goal to give and explain a detailed explanation of this image, but also if you are interested in to know more about the Codex Vindobonensis, you can go to the digital repository of the Leiden University and you can find a study, a book published by Professor Martin Jansen and the Mixtec activist Gavin Aurora Perez Jimenez. They wrote an entire research related with this codex, and if you want to know the whole meaning of this ritual, you can also download this research because it's open access. Also related with peyote ceramics, it's possible to mention this hollow figurine representing a Sinuhé character with a hump cranial deformation, facial and body painting, holding a peyote in his hand, headdress with crossed bands, dressed with ermuffs, and this figurine comes from Jalisco, the west coast of Mexico. And also it's interesting to show the phytomorph pot, with peyote sprouts, which comes from Colima, also in the west coast of Mexico. Related with the different uses of psychedelics in Aztec worldview, which is the goal of this talk, it's possible to say something related. For example, the use of ololiuhqui and peyote for divination was not the only application of these plants among the Aztecs. Like all other hallucinogens, of course, we can develop a critical point of view of this framework used by researchers. I consider that there are not hallucinogens, but also visionary plants. And like all other visionary plants, they were considered as highly effective medicines against several diseases. Medicinal properties of ololiuhqui, the pulverized seed, were a remedy for broken or dislocated bones. Ointed with chili and milk on the forehead, it was considered as a remedy against eye diseases. It cured the pains of syphilis, the pains due to the cold, and dissolved swellings. Taken orally, it acted as an aphrodisiac, and others mention in addition that it was used against pains, swellings, fever, and especially against gout. Here we can appreciate, for example, the therapeutic uses of psychedelics, of these sacred plants, not only related with their visionary properties, but also related with other diseases. You can find this information in Relaciones Geográficas de México. But moreover, the ability of peyote to induce a state of mind in which the person sees future events is mentioned by Francisco Hernandez, a physician sent by the King of Spain at the late of the 16th century. He writes that he was told that there were a male and female form of the plant, and the plant had marvelous properties for the Indians. Beside a hallucinogenic effect, the peyote was used as a medicine applied externally against pain in the joints. Also, for example, if you notice, the colonial sources pointed out the therapeutic and medical uses of these sacred plants, but also denied or stigmatized the spiritual, the religious uses of these plants. Here we have a very well-known sculptor, the sculptor of Xochipilli, the noble who gives flower, and there are a lot of interpretation about these sculptors. Also, I wrote an article related with this deity. It will be published hopefully soon. But for Richard Evans Schultz and Albert Hoffman, the glyphs carved in the body of Xochipilli represent several plants, such as the tobacco flower, the flower of the marigold or ololiuhqui, the button of the sinicuichi, fungi or Tionanacatl, the flower of Poyomachtli or Cacahuaxochitl, and lastly, a stalactite representation of Psilocybus decorum fungi. It's visible on the pedestal. Based on this identification, Gordon Wasson carried out his interpretation of this sculpture. These flowers carved on the body of Xochipilli hold the key to the meaning of the statue and, in addition, the metaphorical meaning of flowers in Nahuatl and in Mesoamerican culture. Also here, we have another representation of Xochipilli, and his calendarical name is Macuilxochitl, 5-flower. It's a musical instrument of stone, and of course, we can recognize 2 leaves, for example, in beside the eyes and the mouth, and probably these leaves are related with ololiuhqui. If you notice, both leaves have a heart shape, and by the reason, it's of course it's an hypothesis, but it's possible to relate these stone leaves with this plant because the ololiuhqui was a sacred plant related with Xochipilli, the god of song, the god of flowers, the god of pleasures. But to explain more precisely this relationship between plants and music, it seems pertinent to me to take as a reference the research carried out by Abraham Cáceres, who considers that although the interpretation of Robert Gordon Wasson is useful, the truth is that for a more specialized study, it is incomplete because it does not explain the relationship between the plants and flowers found in the sculpture and the music. For instance, Cáceres has emphasized the role that ololiuhqui, whose active principles, ergine and hydroxyethylamide, which are of the class of indolic alkaloids, contain psychodyspleptic properties. That is, they modify auditory perception. And this is really a very important topic, a really important issue that has not been explored well enough. If you are also interested in to know more about this, you can go direct to the PhD dissertation of Abraham Casares in Xochipilli, Hallucinogens and Music in Mesoamerican and Amerindian Thought, published by Indiana University. Also, for example, I want to share with you one of the sources which contains the description of a ritual with sacred mushrooms. Here we have a very beautiful representation of the sacred mushrooms of the Teotenango. And next, I will share with you, for example, this ritual contained in the Florentine Codex. This ritual, for example, is in the book 9, chapter. Book 9 is focused on the merchants, the trade people from Tenochtitlan, and I want to share with you this ritual with some detail. At the very first, mushroom had been served. They ate them at the time when they said the shell trumpets were blown. They ate no more food. They only drank chocolate during the night, and they ate mushrooms with honey. When the mushroom took effect on them, then they danced. They wept, but some, while still in command of their sense, entered and sat there by the house on their seats. They danced no more, but only sat there nodding. One saw in vision that already he would die, and there continued weeping. One saw in vision that he would die in battle. One saw in vision that he would be eaten by the wild beast. One saw in vision that he would take captives in war. One saw in vision that he will be rich, wealthy. One saw in vision that he will buy slaves. He will be a slave owner. One saw in vision that he will commit adultery. He will destroy by stones. They will be stoned. One saw in vision that his head will be crushed by stones. They will condemn him. One saw in vision that he will perish in the water. One saw in vision he could live in peace and tranquility until he died. One saw in vision that he will fall from a rooftop. He will fall to his death. However, many things were befall one. He then saw all in vision, even that he will be drowned. Here is interesting, for example, to notice the different kind of visions related, of course, with cultural futures embedded in the Aztec worldview. To continue with the ritual, we can say the next. And when the effects of the mushroom had left them, they consulted among themselves and told one another that they had seen in visions. And they saw in vision what would befell those who had eaten no mushrooms, and what they went about doing. Some were perhaps thieves, some perhaps committed adultery. Howsoever many things were, all were told that one will take captives, one will become seasoned warrior, a leader of the youth. One will die in battles, become rich, buy slaves, provide banquets, ceremonially bait slaves, commit adultery, be strangled, perish in the water, drown, whatsoever was to befall one. They then saw all in vision. Perhaps he will go to his death in Anahuac. And when the division of the night arrived, when it was exactly midnight, the one who provided the banquet thereupon paid his debt to the gods. He burned paper spattered with rubber. He did as had been told above, and once again chocolate was drunk. 2 or 3 times during the night, chocolate was served, and so they danced all night. Indeed, they sang until the dawn broke. Of course, this is a very detailed description of the ritual, but as I previously mentioned, we have to be careful with the historical sources, especially these sources that comes from the colonial period or from the Spanish friars, in order to avoid a naive perspective or in order to avoid hasty generalizations. Of course, as I previously mentioned, the ritual and the sacred uses of psychedelics are part of a philosophy, of a worldview, and unfortunately, the historical sources and the archaeological records are not enough to reach a complete landscape of the whole of the different uses of psychedelics. By the reason we have to be careful. Of course, these historical sources are very useful. Here we have the representation of Mayahuel that is related with the Maguey, the goddess of pulque, an alcoholical beverage. And I only show in order to point out that in some ceremony it was very common to mix pulque with sacred mushrooms. If you want to know more about this, for example, you can read the poems in the manuscript Romances de los Señores de la Nueva España or Cantares Mexicanos. There are an English translations of both manuscripts done by John Bierhorst. Related with more uses of psychedelics in Aztec worldview, we can state that professional diviners prefer other hallucinogens such as ololiuhqui, peyote, and pisitl, tobacco. Divination by using Teonanacatl has been reported far less than the use of these visionary sacred plants. In some of the other codices, pictures of mushrooms are given. Because the codices are often dealing with gods and religion, it seems likely that the mushrooms are the visionary Teonanacatl, and that they were consumed for religious purposes. In most cases, however, there is not adequate description, and the real meaning of the representation remains speculative. As I previously mentioned, we have to be very careful with this information. Here we have a colonial representation of a ritual of sacred mushroom featured in the Codice Magliaviciano. In page 19, we can appreciate a man seated eating the sacred mushrooms, and behind this man, we can appreciate the image of Mictlantecutli, the god of the underworld, but also represented in a colonial fashion related with that. More information related with ololiuhqui, it's possible to find in the history of natural history of the plants of the New Spain, written by Francisco Hernandez. We can find that ololiuhqui, which some call coaxihuitl or snake plant, it's a climbing herb with thin green cordiform leaves, thin stem, green terete, long white flowers. The seed is round and very similar to that of cilantro, hence the name in Nahuatl. The term ololiuhqui means round thing of the plant. The roots are fibrous and thin. The plant causes 4-degree burns, kills syphilis, and mitigates the pain produced by the chills. The seed has some medical uses if it is pulverized or taken as a cooking, or if it is used as a poultice in the head of forehead with milk and chili. It is said to cure eye problems, and when you drink, it acts as an aphrodisiac. Also, in the Florentine Codex, it's possible to find some information related with physicians. Here we can find a text. In one column is in Nahuatl, and another one is in English. And I want to highlight, for example, that the good physician is a diagnostician, experienced, and knower of herbs, of stones, of trees, of roots. He has results of examination, experienced prudence. He's moderate in his acts. He provides health, restore people, provide them spleens, sets bones from them, purge them, give emetics, give them poisons. He lances, he makes incisions in them, stitches them, revives them, envelops in the ashes. But I want to highlight an important cultural feature. We have the words in Nahuatl, for example, xiuximati, xiuximatki, and we can translate in English as knower of herbs. But also here, it's necessary to point out that the prefix x, the meaning is its face. And for example, it's possible to translate this expression as knower of the face of herbs, knower of the face of stones, knower of the faces of trees, and knower of the face of roots. And it's important, for example, to highlight this cultural feature because it's useful to understand the native ontology or the Aztec ontology in a deeper sense. The main sources for the study of psychedelics, for example, during colonial times, which was a book compiled during 1540 and 1585. Here we can appreciate, for example, the images of the sacred mushrooms, the image of peyote, the image of toloache. But also, I consider that we don't have too much time, and then I will move forward with these images. I only want to highlight and to show the information for examples. Here we can find a mixture of information. For example, there are colonial sources. And of course, as I previously mentioned, the colonial sources highlight the therapeutic uses, but deny the spiritual and the religious uses of psychedelics. Here we can find the information related with ololiuhqui or the information related with peyote. If you are interested, you can go directly to the Florentine Codex, book 11, translated by Dibble and Anderson in 1963. And of course, this information is available online. Also, here we have the information related with the sacred mushrooms. And as I previously mentioned, the therapeutic issues are highlighted, but also the sacred and spiritual issues were denied. But these are colonial sources, but they are useful. Finally, the last slide of this presentation, Hernandez agreed with Sagun regarding the effects and use of mushrooms in the banquets of the lords. There are others that, without producing laughter, make pass before the eyes all sorts of visions, such as wars and figures of demons and other enormous and horrendous preferred by the principal men and acquired at a great price and with great care for their feasts and banquets, and which are brown and with a certain acrimony. This information is in the Historia Natural de la Nueva España, book number 1. If you are interested in go directly to this source, there are some reference. If you are interested, of course, I can share with you all this reference. We don't have more time to do it. Mieclas Ocamatil Nochi, thank you very much to all. Muchas gracias a todos. I am waiting for your questions, for your doubts, and open to dialogue this interesting issue with all of you. Thank you very much for your patience, and let's move forward with the question and answer session.
Wonderful. Wow. Please join me in thanking our Osiris for this incredible presentation. You can't tell, Osiris, but there's quite a bit of chat, quite a few questions. People, I think, are extremely excited by what you're sharing. I think some of them may have not been exposed to any of this material before, and I just want to say for myself, I'm learning so much from your talk. I want to start with a question from that I wanted to ask you about, which is something that you wrote in your abstract. So in your abstract for this talk, you wrote about what your goal was. And so you said that your goal is to show the ancestral roots of sacred mushrooms.
Can you hear me, Alex?
Yes, I can. Yep. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Osiris? We were so close there for a minute. No, maybe not. I might put the questions in the chat. Okay, so let me do this. I don't know if you can hear me, Osiris, but I'm going to put this. I'm going to put this into the.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm not able to hear you anymore. I have some questions in the chat, in the question and answer sessions, but also I will be waiting a couple of minutes for Alex. I am trying to.
So, Osiris, if you can't hear me, I'm just going to say I'll write to you in the chat. Please go ahead and answer the questions in the Q&A. My question is, but we can certainly hear you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep, we can hear you. So you had talked about
you can hear me. Okay, I don't know if I have I don't know if we have enough time to the question and answer sessions, but for example, I have some questions. For example, of course, I can share the link of the dissertation. It will be open access. The first image of the substance, the murals in Teotihuacan, for example, it could be a morning glory. Also, it could be a datura or a toloatzin or a floripondio, but there are not consensus between the researchers. Have you found reference about the use of Papa Peyote for women giving birth? My Mohawk mentor, Katsi Cook, has used it, got good success. No, unfortunately, I have not found reference related with the use of Papa Peyote, and I'm interested if you have some information. Of course, it could be a way of research. And also, of course, I will share with you the website of the Codex, of the Vidobonensis Codex. Is in the digital repository of Leiden University. And the last question, in the United States, we can use psychedelic plants if we can show it is part of a religious. Was psychedelic used by Aztec a religious act? Yes, of course. And what role did the plants have in Aztec cosmology? Well, as I previously mentioned, the sacred plants was considered as deities by themselves. And of course, sacred plants played an important role inside Aztec cosmology. If you are interested, please feel free to write me, to send an email or to put in contact, and of course I can share you with your reference books, codex, and so on. And well, I don't have to spend more times, and thank you very much for your patience.
Okay, I don't know if Osiris, you know this, but we actually still have 10 minutes, I believe. Because our time goes until 6:40 p.m. Pacific, so we have 10 more minutes. But we may get a little bit of a break here because I think we lost Osiris. So I just wanted to thank him for this incredible talk. I'm sorry that we had a bad connection from Mexico City, but I was really taken with his talk, and it seems to be a lot of incredible questions. It looks like his dissertation will be published soon, if it's not already available through the channel that he was mentioning. So it's pretty incredible. I did have a question around something that we didn't get a chance to talk about, which maybe we can address with Osiris offline later, which is about how to. He said in his abstract that my goal is to show the ancestral roots of sacred mushrooms and to go beyond the epistemological extractivism to achieve the recognition of indigenous rights. So this phrase, epistemological extractivism, especially as it's related to traditional knowledge, was really interesting to me. And my question for Osiris was, how do we do that? How do we avoid epistemological extractivism? I'll say for myself, I sometimes will give talks and to friends, to colleagues, sometimes even formal talks, where I want to make it clear that I'm not an archaeologist, anthropologist, I don't have a history degree, but I wanted to show that the peoples of the Americas have used plant medicine, mushrooms in sacred ways, that there's a long lineage of this by the Mayan and Aztecs, and so how do we do that in a way that's not extractive? So Osiris, I don't know if you can hear me, but thanks for coming back onto the Hopin screen. I was asking a question about this question around it. How do we avoid extractivism or epistemological extractivism? Do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Yes, of course, it's a very important issue. It's, for example, the knowledge and the acknowledgement of the ancestral roots of the use of psychedelics. It's very important to avoid epistemological extractivism. And of course, I consider that it would be helpful to achieve the plenty recognition of indigenous rights. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time now anymore because the next presentation it's coming. But if you are interested, for example, in the networking rooms or by mail, of course, I can answer all of this.
I think we have 8 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes. So we have a little bit of time because the next talk is at. Yeah. So.
Sorry. If we have time. Sorry.
Oh, no
yes,
problem.
Of course. It's important for example, these research efforts. For example, the goal of these research efforts is to contribute to the recognition of indigenous rights, and of course, this research is a tool to fight against discrimination, against racism. And of course, it's a way of contribute. It's a kind of offering. It's a kind of work offering to the community. In this case, for example, this research was focused mainly on archaeological records, historical sources, and so on. But for example, this evidence, these archaeological records and these historical sources must be completed with collaborative research methodologies with indigenous peoples, for example, with the Nahua people, with Virarica people, with Mazatec people, in order to build an intercultural democracy. And I consider, for example, that the public policies related, for example, with psychoactive substance that with sacred plants, and also must have a dialogue or must be based in an intercultural democracy. And I consider, for example, that this research is useful in order to avoid the epistemological extractivism, the economic extractivism, for example. I know that, for example, now it's very controversial, as in the previous talk we saw with the talk of Osiris Garcia Sequeira, who focused his analysis, for example, in the role of capitalism or economic extractivism. And of course, it's very important to reflect critically about the heritage of indigenous people, the biopiracy, and by this reason also it's important to know the roots, to know the ancient roots, the ancestral roots of this practice, for example, that began thousands of years ago. And by the reason it's very important to reflect about it.
I have a question there's a question in the chat about Aztec cosmology and the role of sacred plants in the mushroom or ololiuhqui, morning glory seeds. So in the United States, Sean McAllister asks, in the United States, we can use psychedelic plants if we can show it as part of religious practice. What do we know about its meaning as a religious or sacred act in the Aztec cosmology?
As I previously mentioned, of course, there are part of there are a central part of the worldview of the Aztec religions, but also they were related with a philosophical worldview. You know, the hickory is not only a plant. Hickory also involves territory. Hickory also people. Hickory also involves sacred narratives. Is not an isolated cultural feature, but also it's a cultural feature embedded in a worldview, in an ontology, in a native ontology. And by the reason, for example, the sacred plants are at the core of ancient wisdom, not only religion. I also want to talk about wisdom, indigenous philosophy, because sometimes we tend to overlap, for example, the wisdom, the philosophy with other uses. By the reason, at the beginning of this talk, I state that one of the goals was or is the recognition of philosophical uses of psychedelics. And of course, sacred plants are at the core of Aztec Maya, Virrárica, Tzotzil, Celtal, indigenous worldviews. Yes, of course.
Is there any understanding of how mushrooms may have been used by the Aztecs? We have this account in the Codex of people seeing various visions from a Spanish friar, as my understanding. Maybe you can tell us more. But do you have a sense? Was there a circle of people consuming plants? Was it from a particular segment of the social order or population? Were they widely used? Is there any, and also is there differential use between obviously mushrooms and morning glory seeds? So I'm just, it seems like from the codexes that we don't really know that. I didn't see that in the talk, but I'm curious, do you have a sense of how it was used individually, in circle, with a facilitator? How do we understand that? A medicine person?
Yeah, for example, unfortunately, we have only one historical source of these sacred rituals, but also, for example, the historical source of the Florentine Codex was focused on the traders, on the merchants, for example. And this ritual, for example, was offered for a merchant who wants to give offerings to the gods. And of course, we have to be careful in order to avoid hasty generalizations. You know, this testimony, this historical source is focused on a specific segment of people, a specific kind of population, a specific class, you know, social class. And of course, it's useful, but of course, we have to be careful in order to avoid hasty generalizations. Unfortunately, the historical sources and archaeological records are the different pieces of a puzzle, and it's impossible to solve the puzzle in a whole. You know, it's only we have only fragments, and of course these fragments are useful. But for example, this information provided by archaeology and by historical sources must be complemented with ethnographic research, with contemporary indigenous peoples, with the people who nowadays has this ancient legacy. Because if we look only at the historical or archaeological records, our vision will be incomplete. You know, of course, it's useful, and of course, it's related with one social class. But also it's useful to give an idea. And I want to highlight one cultural feature. After the ceremony, they gathered to talk about the visions. No, it was a collective experience. They shared their visions with the other participants in the ritual, and I consider that it's very important. Probably it's a nuance, a minor detail, but it's not a minor thing, you know? And of course, it will be useful to understand better the psychedelic experience. It's a shared experience, and it's important to talk about the visions with other people. Yeah, and for me, this is important. Not only the visions or the ritual paraphernalia, but also the reflections related with visions. I consider that it's a very useful, and we have to take into account these nuances.
Well, this is just completely fascinating to me, and it looks like a number of other people in the room. For the audience, don't go anywhere, because we go right into the next talk here in this track, which I'll be moderating, which is about how psychedelics helped Daniel Garcia overcome emotional, sexual, and physical trauma with hockey culture, and he's an NHL player. And we'll be talking about TBI, traumatic brain injury, so very exciting talk. But before that, I'd like to thank our speaker, Osiris, Sinuhé, González, Romero. Thank you for this incredible talk, Osiris. This is wonderful. Your dissertation will be published by Leiden. Do you know when that'll be coming out? Sometime next year?
In 2 months, for example. My PhD defense will be on June 22. It will be open for anyone who wants to attend. And of course, the PhD dissertation written in Spanish and Nahuatl, with some interviews with Nahua people, will be available online, free or open access. And if you go to the digital repository of the Leiden University Press or to the website of the Calling Project, you can find it. And if you are interested, I can share the link with you. And thank you very much to all. Thank you, the Chacruna team, for your support. And thank you very much to the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's give a warm thanks and welcome. And please check out the chat, and we'll see you at the rest of the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.